attending the Attribution Live.
Mhm.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for attending the Attribution Lie. This is not your sister's attribution model. This is how to escape reporting paralysis and use the data you already have to drive growth. My name is Abby Hill. I'm the VP of Marketing at Leadus, and I am very excited to have my two esteemed panelists and guests with me for the panel today. And I just want to talk about overall, just today's conversation is really about moving beyond attribution, about taking that data that we already have and how we use it to better drive decisions and move faster. So we all know the roles that these two panelists play, but both Amy and Grant have been deep in the trenches and seeing attribution models evolve and and essentially break as well. So I'd first like to introduce Amy Labrie-Hahn. She is the VP of Training and Development at Leadus. Amy's a true MOPS and MAP powerhouse, so this is a treat for everyone. She's an innovator, a coach, a strategic consultant who spent years helping companies completely rethink how they use marketing technology. It's actually how she and I met. Her background combines technical expertise with practical execution, making her a key voice today on how marketing teams can break free from data overload and build strategies that actually deliver results. Uh, my apologies, we'll put that in here. And next we're joined by Grant Gregorian, a marketing data and analytics expert. Grant is a startup veteran, a B2B marketing tech expert, and an advocate for making data actionable, especially with the smart use of AI. He's passionate about helping companies connect their data to real growth outcomes, and today he's bringing his practical, battle-tested insights on where attribution falls short and how organizations can use smart analytics to stay ahead. Together, both Amy and Grant bring a combination of strategy, tech, and practical leadership that I think you're all really going to appreciate as we unpack the attribution lie. So let's get into it. First, let's just kind of create some baseline here, right? For both Amy and Grant and for our attendees today. What is attribution? What was it? What is it today? Where do we think it's going? How has it changed? And so I'll kind of throw it over to you, Amy, first to kind of kick us off there.
Sure. So I actually want to start and say, what are we actually talking about when we say attribution, right? What is attribution now? Where has it been, right? Where has it come? Because I think the fundamental problem here is we have attribution models for days, right? We all talk about lead source and first touch and last touch and multi-touch and weighted and W shape and all of the things. But no one really knows how to populate the data, use the data. People are buying these fancy new tools to show them all of these pieces of data in some sort of structure, but it's not always translatable, right? So we still arrive at how do you connect marketing activities with business outcomes, right?
Yeah, the way I look at it in terms of what attribution is what Amy said, connecting what marketing does to business outcomes. And what's really tough about doing that, especially in B2B complex sales cycle, is that it just takes a long time. And there are many touch points across many stakeholders. And so communicating all that complexity with a dashboard to a busy executive, it's really hard. And so it can derail in many ways, both from like data capture point of view, from dashboards that are overly complicated, that focus on the wrong things. So we can talk more about that, but that's what I think of in terms of attribution is it's incredibly critical because it answers questions like, what should we do more of? Where should we reallocate more of our resources? What sort of activities should we stop doing because they're wasteful? And so they're all trying to drive efficiency and effectiveness in marketing. But in this context of like, it's a complex sales cycle. How do we do that? That's what attribution is.
Perfect. And I think the one thing to add to that too is there's just so much in the way that attribution has evolved over the years. And so I feel strongly that this panel will really help kind of cut through a lot of that. And so in your experience, and I'll start with you, Grant, where does attribution typically break down for marketing or for rev ops teams? Like talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, Usually companies start with like a single touch attribution, like a lead source or something like that. It's a really good way to get started. Where do we meet this person? Where do we acquire their name? Um, but it becomes very inaccurate, right? Because there's many other things that happen during the deal. And so then what we do next is we start capturing more of those touch points. So we say it's not just lead source, there's also other campaigns that happen along the way. And now we immediately run into the problem because we have many different campaigns or many different touch points of various kinds of all thrown into um, one big bucket. There's like web visits, webinar attendance, trade show booth attendance, clicks on your website or on your emails. What about opening an email? Does that count? So you have all this like complicated data that you have to gather and put in one place. And then you have to decide which of those and how to attribute it to the outcome that happens. Which outcome? Is it the meeting? Is it the op being created? Is it the closed one? So then you make all these decisions, and then you'll probably have to buy tech to make it all work, some sort of a vendor, or you have to architect it all within your own data warehouse.
Mhm.
And let's say that you pass all of those obstacles because they're all technical and it's all kind of communicating and deciding with your team. Then you'll make some sort of a dashboard, and the dashboard will have lots of components. And the place where I see it break down the most is at this like post dashboard phase, because we know how to collect data really well. We know how to put them in dashboards. There will be many, pie charts and line charts. They'll say first touch, last touch, W-shaped touch, whatever the things are. And then at the end, what will happen is, or what I very often see is something that is very complicated. And at the end of the day, when a new team member joins or when the marketing executives comes in to look at the dashboard, they're like, Grant, I can see that you did a lot of work here and I appreciate it, but like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to interpret this? Does first touch mean that if it was good in the first touch, but not on the W, is that good still? Or does it have to be good on all the models? Or which model should I be using? And it leaves a lot of, the dashboard by itself can leave a lot of questions unanswered. And so we're kind of right back to where we started. So even though we have the data and even though it's visualized, we're still paralyzed and we're not sure what to do. That is one of the most common things that I see.
Yeah. And I would add too, I think, Grant, everything you said aligns with my thoughts that we kind of think about people, process, and technology, right? And like the handoff between systems and all of our processes, when they're not speaking the same language, we run into that issue. But there's some general aspects, like the handful of times that I see, or not the handful of times, so you see this breakdown a lot, but the handful of reasons are typically, we've got that siloed and incomplete data. All these systems pushing data to some place that we hope is gathering it correctly, right? Or tracking hygiene. I think there's fundamentally, we often don't have the right just field data in place. And then we break, our data flows break down. Overly simplistic models, and then the really overly complex, right? Where we're, it's too hard to explain. We lose our audiences, right? When we're reporting out on it, we don't know how to create the narrative around what we're seeing. Misaligned definitions. What is a lead? What is qualified? Agreeing how we're talking about attribution. And if we start then massaging in the conversation, the where we think credit is due, we get trust breaks down. So then we have teams kind of feeling pitted against each other. Human errors are always part of it, of course. And then just lack of iteration and audits. Are we actually taking the time to review our quote unquote models, right? Or does it match what we're actually seeing happening? And I think everything's can be really reactive.
That's the great points. I think the one thing I would like to add to this too, and kind of transitions us into our next question, but I take a look at this too as like we're talking about where the breakdown could be for marketing or rev ops, but kind of taking a step above that is organizations are concerned about lift, right? We're talking about MQLs and lead source and SQLs and SALs and everything through the funnel and all of these things that are really, really important metrics because they help drive the marketing engine forward. But ultimately, as we're reporting these types of things or sharing that, creating that transparency, the lift is what's most important, which is what has led us to why attribution as we know it isn't the most effective way to report out on that. And so I am, like, I would say alignment is my love language. And so being aligned with the senior leadership in the organization and knowing what levers to push and pull, that's really what attribution is. That's where like making the sausage kind of exists. But we know all those details, but it's kind of sharing that and really identifying what types of levers there are and how do we make them more effective and more efficient to move forward and be profitable. So the next thing that I'll ask and Grant, I'll start with you. So how would you recommend a team that's stuck in reporting paralysis right now with all this data and all this information? How do you get unstuck and how do you get unstuck tomorrow?
Mm. Okay, well, this is where I've worked with many different marketing organizations. I'm often kind of, I don't want to say brought in, but I'm often contacted by people who get stuck in attribution. And it is usually after all of the work is done, like that I mentioned earlier, of collecting the data, deploying some sort of a tool, getting the dashboards, and then we're still not getting use of it. And they're like, Grant, how come? I thought you said that attribution was supposed to help us. And what I often realize is that there's kind of a clash a little bit of expectations because we deploy these dashboards because we really want to have a self-service model of analytics where our ops team or our analytics team just manages the set of dashboards and reports. And then the business users are supposed to not bother us with questions and instead go to the dashboards and answer questions on their own. And when it comes to attribution, that's where that breaks down because it's just too complicated. There's too many levers, and it's really hard to train the team of generally smart, driven, professional people to use your very complicated dashboard. And so what I tell them is that there's one of two ways you can go about it. One is take on more responsibility as a team to deliver actual insights and not just shove dashboards in front of their faces. So say, hey, how often do you need this data? When do you do your campaign ROI reviews? Are you going to do quarterly kind of look backs? How about as a team on a quarterly basis, we as an analytics team, we as the ops people, go look at those dashboards and put together reports for you with actual recommendations, like business recommendations that say, this trade show was amazing. Please do that again. This webinar, it sucked. Don't do that again. This email, you know what I mean? Like some sort of judgment calls. And then you can debate about it. The marketing team will say, no, it didn't. It was a great webinar. And you can say, yes, there were lots of attendees, but none of them turned into ops. See right here, because of this and this and this. And therefore, oh, okay, I see. So that's one way. And then the other way is to simplify the dashboard, not have so much stuff in it. And so that's where you have to really use your editorial judgment. But I would say one of the best ways is to just forget the attribution models themselves and start with simple counting things. I love the counting. It goes a really long way. So for example, say things like, how many touch points does it take? Don't talk about like what kind, or just on average, it takes 20 interactions across how many people? Across 4 people to get a deal closed one. And so then you can say, oh, look at this deal. This deal had less interactions. How come? What happened there? What sort of, or this $1 million deal had 300 interactions. Wow, that over a course of 2 years. Crazy. Just being able to simplify it in terms of number of things, like level of effort. Sometimes it's called sufficiency metrics. Like what is sufficient for a deal to tip over to become a real deal? How much effort does it take? And executives love those kinds of numbers. You don't have to get into the modeling. You're just using the numbers you have to describe the deals and describe the sort of marketing activity that's taking place. So those are my two unstuck recommendations. It's like, do more work, do your job, which is like analyze the data for them and do a good job of doing that. Asterisk AI stuff could help with that a lot. We can talk about that later. And then it's foreshadowing. And then number two is make it simpler.
Yep. Yep. I love it. Make it simpler. I think, Abby, you kind of mentioned this too, like we need to circle back to the overall business objectives. I think if you stop and you say, all right, let's get back to like brass tacks, we're going to step out a little bit, understand what is actually meaningful. How do I start looking for that, right? We always are pairing the numbers with the narratives. Here's the impact of our Q1 ABM campaign, right, on revenue. And connecting that back to the strategic goals. So it's numbers with narratives, numbers with narratives, numbers with narratives. We sourced this pipeline, we did it efficiently, and we influenced even more revenue along the way, right? And yeah, stepping out of like the complexity and I think the reactivity, right? So, and I know that's everyone feels like that, you know, a lot of the time is we're trying to pull together evidence of all the great stuff we're doing, but step back, slow down, and create the story.
I'll add one more thing, which is like, people ask like, well, make it simpler sounds easy, but how do you make it simpler? So I just wanted to add a couple ideas on that. The one way to make something simpler is to think about one deal at a time. That's one of the most common and most useful things you can do is present the data for a single deal to your audience. Like board members, for some reason, or CEOs love these big slides which show, you know, like this happened and then this other thing happened and the op was created and then here's where the MQL happened and all that kind of stuff is incredibly helpful because it lets them visualize what the data underneath actually looks like. And you can have lots of ticks and arrows pointing to things that you thought were important. And then you show one slide and then another and then another. And then they're like, show me more because I want to get like the general pattern of how it, you know what I mean? They try to do it with their brain. And then that's when you hit them with the dashboard because you say, guess what? I aggregated all of this across all the deals. And and then, you know, do you see what I mean? Like you have to walk them through the actual data, an individual instance, show another one. I mean, that's how we learn. And then say, oh, on the aggregate, here's how it looks. So that's one practical way in which you could start doing it.
Yeah, you're teaching the interpretation, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point to round that out. So thank you for that. Also, if you are attending this webinar live, feel free to throw some questions into the chat at any given point in time. I have gotten a few directly sent to me, so we will have questions at the end. And we'll certainly, I think I forgot to mention this earlier, but this will be recorded and shared as well, in case you knew someone who wanted to attend but couldn't make it today. So now that we've kind of rounded that piece out of the foundations and where we can help and see some of that lift there, I want to throw it back into really kind of that sexy topic right now. I think it's on every marketer's mind. It's certainly on mine. I'm trying to find ways to expand and to use AI, but you both worked in AI and automation, and the two of them they go so hand in hand so well. Where does AI help in reporting, and where does it create? Where is it just creating noise? Like how do we rise above that? And Amy, maybe you want to kick it off first and kind of take a stab at that and share your thoughts. And Grant, I know we've had numerous conversations about this, so I'd love for you to share as well.
Right. So I think everyone is trying to figure out how to start peppering this in. What tools do I use for it? How do I, you know, do it? I think everyone's kind of in the space where I know how to like create content maybe for my marketing, but for reporting, we can actually do pretty cool things with like data integration and aggregation, which is unifying scattered data sources, right? Faster than we can manually. Can actually help with finding anomaly detection. So trends or red flags, things in your reporting or in what's going on in your pipeline that are like, this is weird, right? Predictive forecasting, of course, right? Like we can predict this many MQLs next quarter based on based on this. So it's really great at that. And then of course, personalization and dashboards. All of these things are doable, but also can create a ton of noise, right? And it's like, well, okay, I don't even know how to create those. Like, I don't know where to start. What about just like if we try to make it simpler, like we can actually create a narrative and stories around the data you have without you having to really deep dive into it. And I think, Grant, we've had some interesting discussions about how you can create some story out of that, actually.
Yeah, one thing that's helpful is because when we use the term AI, it's like a blanket statement for lots of things. So like Amy mentioned, like anomaly detection or early alert systems or data aggregation, there are like statistical systems that can do that. But I think the one that everyone is excited about is the one that can, the one that we often do, like the ChatGPT style AI, the one that I can chat with. Can I chat with my dashboard? And of course, lots of vendors are releasing things like this, where there's like a little sidebar by the dashboard, and the user is supposed to like ask questions of your data. And those things I have experimented with extensively, and I find that what's really important is for us as operators is to provide the business context for those systems. Otherwise, they're so dumb. I'm finding that the LLMs are terrible at math. So they're never going to do the attribution work for you. What I find that works really well instead is to not rely on them to do the math of aggregating or calculating things for you, is if you do the math, you come up with the tables, you tell it what to say about it. Like generally, here's what the table means. And if the number is high, say things like this. And if the number is low, say things like this. You could even give it your past reports of what. Remember that homework you were supposed to do yourself on a quarterly basis with business recommendations? That is great input for an LLM because it will then try to sound like you and say words that you used. And when you pair this like simpler tables, so for example, if you give it a table of marketing interactions for one deal, and you tell it some deal statistics, like here's how big the deal was, here's who the people were on the deal, and you give it an example of a deal story, it will do a really great job. If you throw 10 more things like that at it, it's really good at crafting stories. It's like a surprisingly creative tool, but it's a language tool. And so it will put language around the numbers, maybe in just a way that your audience needs, is to like interpret the numbers and to tell stories with it and to tell the story of a deal. Or a story of a campaign. A campaign started like this. There were this many attendees, and of those, here's how many became MQL. And of those, here's some example companies that came who are big, important companies, ICP for us. And of those, here's how many turned into an op. And of those, you know what I mean? It's really good at just like generating tons of words around the numbers. So if you are able to put those two together to say, here's some simple tables, LLM system, and here's some example narratives. I found that to be incredibly effective at generating these like packets of analysis that you would have had to do yourself previously. So I'm using that a ton. I'm bullish on it. I think it's going to be excellent. And I guess I have been paying attention less on these like anomaly detection or like more complicated machine learning things. And I've been more experimenting with the LLM systems. How can we use that in data communication across teams?
Right.
Yeah, great. So I just wanted just to be cognizant, we've got a few minutes left here. I did get a couple of questions sent to me, but I just want to throw one last question quickly to each of our panelists. I just want to leave attendees with one final thought, if you will, before we get to the questions. What advice would you give to someone building a post-attribution dashboard today? Like where would they start? How can they go about that with this new model or this new thought process around it? And maybe just kind of a quick hit on each one of you for an answer.
I can kick that off. I mean, I think there is a level of kind of house cleaning that needs to occur where we start to work backwards. Decluttering, right? Everyone has time and resources gaps, so I get that this can be difficult, but we do need to identify bottlenecks, right? You need to kind of understand where breakdowns are occurring, identify your internal champions, external supports, and I'm kind of living by the phrase right now, like, don't overcomplicate things. Don't overcomplicate to compensate for what you don't think you have, right? Trust your
Nice.
ability to see and tell the story about what your data is showing and know who you're speaking to. Right.
My advice for post attribution dashboard is for you to think of it like I like to use the analogy of like a pyramid, like a data pyramid. And I want you to think of the dashboard as not being at the tip of the spear, but at the kind of in the middle of the pyramid, of informational pyramid. So at the top is like, what are we supposed to do? Well, who cares? If you were in an elevator with the executive, just like you only have a few things to say about what the dashboard was saying, that's at the very tippy top. It's like a statement that says, the webinar sucked. Don't do that again. That's like your takeaway. Okay, but why? What happened? Oh, it's because there were lots of attendees, but you know what I mean? There's like and then tell me more. Who came? Okay, well then we look at maybe there's one slide. So it goes from a statement to like a slide. Now this executive says, that's great insight. I want to add it to my board deck. Can you send me a slide? So there's a slide. Okay, so what's below the slide? Maybe there's a report, a more detailed report. And what's behind that? Well, that's where the dashboard comes in with all the charts that show how many attendees they were and what happened to them afterwards and so on and so forth. And then, oh, but is that true? That can't be true. Surely can we drill in? And at the bottom of the pyramid is the actual transactional data that goes back to where, whatever system of record it came from. So I want you to think about those kinds of informational products for your team. And can you efficiently build these pyramids where you can go deep down and drill down to analyze, and you can also come back up. And depending on the context, are you in an elevator? Are you doing a meeting? Are you doing a webinar? You can deploy the right format and the right size for the data.
Yeah, great. Great. So I want to get there's two questions that kind of address what you were just saying, Grant. The first one is, can you recommend specific LLM tools that are particularly good at the analysis piece of it? And one of the other questions, and we'll just wrap this up here too as well, is someone said they're just starting to broaden and expand their attribution application in their current role. Do they need to be looking at purchasing expensive tools, or can they do this in a more budget-friendly approach? And I think they kind of address that LLM side or that AI side of things. So I'll throw that just to you, Grant, and then we'll wrap it up here shortly.
LLMs, I have tried. I've tried the OpenAI one, tried using the Google one. I would say that whichever one you use, I would like stick with it because I found that they're equivalent. Because what we're trying to get is for them to say words around the numbers. And remember, don't make them do math. Just have them tell stories with the math that you already did. And they all tell stories really well. They're just like really great at generating words. But I like to stick with one because when you move a prompt from one that's been optimized for one to another one, it doesn't really work. So so just pick your favorite system and just try to experiment by giving it little tables and things to say about the tables.
Mhm.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. And again, apologize everyone for going over just a little bit, but we're just going to wrap this up here. Thank you again to Amy and Grant for attending and being our esteemed colleagues and panelists today. Thank you to our attendees. Like I said, we did record this. We will send out the recording. You can feel free to share it. Just two things to note. You may have already downloaded the post attribution growth playbook. And then as a special treat, you're getting early access today to our reporting clarity tool that will also go out in the follow-up email. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or any feedback for us, please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at leadus.com. You can email us info@leadus, or you can give us a phone call. I certainly don't man the lines, but feel free to call us if you must. But thank you, everyone. Today was great. I appreciate it. I know it was a lot of information. Please feel free to follow up with any of us if you have any questions. Have a good one. Thank you.
Well.